Imagine you could give your child a genetic head start in life. I mean, we're talking about cognitive enhancement, literally making them smarter right from birth. Today, we're diving into this really fascinating paper that uses Singapore as a case study to explore what that future might actually look like. And as it turns out, the price of a perfect mind might be way, way higher than any of us imagine. So, this whole thing kicks off with a pretty surprising finding. A recent study showed that people in Singapore are significantly more open to the idea of genetically enhancing their kids' intelligence than people in the US. And that startling difference is exactly why we need to pump the brakes. Before we just race ahead, we've got to ask, what are the real-world consequences of a technology like this? To answer that, the paper lays out 5 critical warnings or caveats that are all deeply connected. We're going to explore this strange paradox of gaining intelligence but actually losing freedom. Then we'll look at how being smarter might not make you any happier, and how an enhanced mind could still end up with no job. And then we'll zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the risk of creating a new social divide and, believe it or not, a surprising threat to the country's entire population. Okay, let's jump right into the first big one, this tension between more intelligence and less freedom. You'd think being smarter would automatically mean you're more autonomous, more in control of your life, right? Well, it turns out the reality could be a lot more complicated. And this is really the heart of the issue. The promise, the sales pitch, is clear. A smarter brain means more personal freedom. But the reality, especially in a culture like Singapore's, could be the complete opposite. Just imagine parents who've invested a fortune in this technology. Their expectations aren't just going to be high. They're going to be a crushing weight, potentially erasing any freedom their child has to choose their own life path. And you really can't understand this without looking at the cultural context. We're talking about an environment shaped by kiasu, this intense cultural fear of losing out, and tiger parenting, where academic achievement is everything. The competition is already off the charts. Now just imagine throwing cognitive enhancement into that mix. The pressure on that kid to deliver a return on that investment, it would be absolutely monumental. But, okay, let's say that child somehow succeeds under all that pressure. Does that actually guarantee they'll be happy? This gets us to our second big caveat, and it's a fundamental question. Is there really a direct link between a higher IQ and a happier life? And once again, we see this huge clash between the promise and a pretty harsh potential reality. The idea they're selling is a happier, more fulfilled life. But in a shame-based culture where success is all about outperforming your peers, that constant pressure to be number one could easily backfire, leading to way more anxiety and a lot less happiness. This whole situation is perfectly described by something called the Red Queen principle. Think of it like this. You're running as fast as you can on a treadmill, but you're not actually going anywhere. That's what happens when everyone gets a cognitive boost. The entire baseline for success just shifts upward. So you have to work harder and harder and harder just to stay in the same place. So you can see how this creates a perfect storm for unhappiness. You could end up with a whole generation of kids whose own dreams are totally ignored because of their parents' ambitions, all while facing these impossible expectations in a race that literally has no finish line. The result isn't a better life, it's just a frustrated and miserable one. Okay, so this brings us to the third warning, and this one is super practical. Let's assume an enhanced child aces every single exam and gets into the best university. Does that actually guarantee them a successful career? Well, the paper argues, probably not. You know, a lot of the motivation for this comes from an ethical concept called procreative beneficence. It's basically the idea that parents have a moral duty to have the best child possible, to give them the best start in life. But here's the huge problem. What if the best start we're designing for, just raw academic intelligence, is no longer the golden ticket to a great job? And check out the numbers on this. They're pretty eye-opening. Right now in Singapore, 60% of young adults already have a university degree. I mean, think about that for a second. The market for highly educated graduates is already completely saturated. So what happens when you pump a new generation of even more academically gifted people into that same system? You're not solving a problem, you're just amplifying it. And we don't even have to guess what this might look like. We can just look at other countries in East Asia for some serious cautionary tales. A surplus of overqualified graduates has led to the precarious gig economy, the really tragic hikikomori phenomenon of extreme social withdrawal, and these disillusionment movements in China like lying flat. The warning signs are crystal clear. A smart mind with no prospects can lead to a broken spirit. So far, we've been talking about the individual. But what about society as a whole? This brings us to the fourth warning. the very real risk that enhancement could create a society of genetic haves and have-nots. And it all boils down to one simple but huge question. Who's actually going to be able to afford perfection? Because while some optimists might argue this technology could level the playing field for everyone, the economic reality points to a much, much darker future. Look, this tech is going to be wildly expensive. That's almost a guarantee. And it's not a life-saving medical treatment, so you can pretty much forget about government subsidies. The math is simple and it's brutal. Access will be limited to the rich. This doesn't just widen the existing gap between rich and poor, it creates a new genetic class divide. And in a multiracial society like Singapore's, a divide based on wealth can be like pouring gasoline on existing social tensions. All right, that brings us to our fifth and final warning. And this one is fascinating because it connects the super high cost of this technology to a major national issue: demographics. So think about the position this puts parents in. It's an impossible dilemma. On one side, you have this immense social pressure to give your child the best start, but on the other, with no state support, you have this absolutely crushing financial burden. The logical path here is pretty concerning. The high cost creates a massive financial burden. As a result, couples who might have wanted 2 or 3 children could decide to pour all their resources into having just one superior, enhanced child. For a country like Singapore, which is already facing a plummeting birth rate, this could accelerate a demographic decline with really serious economic consequences down the road. So, what's the ultimate takeaway here? The authors are really clear about this. These 5 warnings, they're not prophecies set in stone. They're meant to be giant, flashing warning signs. They are the urgent questions that Singapore, and frankly every society, needs to answer before opening the door to a genetically enhanced future. It leaves us with one final, powerful question to think about. In a world that so often feels like a competition, what are the true consequences when we can actually purchase a biological advantage? What kind of society does that create?